Hi, everybody, and welcome to season 3 of Little Wisdom, where we explore self development one baby step at a time. Today, we're speaking to an author, creator, speaker, and a dynamic life coach who is committed to helping individuals uncover their full potential. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about childhood trauma recovery and the piece of advice his mom gave him, which is talk about it. Zach Touchon, everyone, welcome to the show.
It is my pleasure, and I'm so excited to be here with you. And to all you listeners, thank you guys for being here as well. This is very exciting for me because there's somebody out there that might get a golden nugget here. So I'm really excited to be here. And it's just amazing the ripple effects of our positive actions. And it's just been blowing me away lately. So I
Oh,
wanted to say thank
absolutely.
you for having me here.
No, and thank you for reaching out and wanting to have this conversation because, I think there's a lot of stuff that we spoke about earlier, which is definitely going to resonate with people. And just jumping right into the conversation, in the earlier conversation we had, you mentioned something and it stuck with me. And I think a lot of people out there are going to identify with this. Um, you mentioned how some people don't know how to talk about what they're feeling or how they're feeling, especially when it comes to men, because they don't really want to be perceived as weak. So I know we had a whole big conversation around that, but I just wanted to start with, a bit of a difficult question. And so we can get right into it. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. First of all, men have been conditioned to be tough. And many men were not like me and didn't grow up with a mom who insisted that we talk about it. In my family, it was also very common to say things like, I'm proud of you and I love you. And hugging was very normal. What I've discovered in my work is that women seem to be a little bit more open to doing some of the journaling that's required, the some of the different practices that we need to do. A lot of the clients that I work with and students that I have might have gone through post-traumatic stress disorder from military, might have went through some stuff as a kid. But what we find is that we end up comparing our trauma and we downgrade our trauma, is what I call it. And we don't give it credit because it's not worthy of us giving it credit. And so we ignore it, we stuff it down, and we have no idea that it's completely controlling our lives. And men have a real hard time with the idea because they don't want to appear weak. But what I told you is it's not weak to walk through your trauma. It's not weak to talk about your feelings. As a matter of fact, it's quite courageous, and it takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And whenever you are able to do this, what you're going to find is, particularly for men, women have a lot of really deep relationships with each other, and men kind of are missing that. Many men they have a very on the surface type of relationship with most of the men. They don't have a lot of deep conversations. They don't talk about their feelings. They don't cry in public. They don't hug very often. And a lot of this is conditioning. But what happens is when you do become vulnerable as a man, it becomes a really, really amazing superpower because people find you more genuine. People find you more open. People tend to like people who show some flaws. And so whenever you're vulnerable and you open up about your feelings, all of a sudden you can find a whole new freedom, a lot of new friends, and you can find it to be a huge superpower. And I'm going to tell you a story about two different people really quickly. Number one
Yeah.
is a guy who did 27 years in the penitentiary, and he had a really rough childhood. When he got out of the penitentiary, he ended up having a child with the woman, and the child ended up passing away. And after about a week or 2 weeks, I think, and he was not able to cry about it. And so people who come out of prison, particularly, are really going to have a hard time getting in touch with their feelings. Men who come out of the military have a really hard time getting in touch with their feelings because they've been trained to not show that emotion. And so we have to untrain a lot of people to kind of get them to open up.
Yeah. I just want to dig into that because I'm curious. So, as a person, on the outside listening to this, and of course, you're the expert here, having interacted and, of course, coached so many people through this. When you say they cannot get in touch with their feelings or they have a difficulty, I think what I'm having a tough time understanding, where I need your help, is it that they build a wall that they actually cannot feel it, or is it that they feel it and then they're like, oh, I shouldn't talk about it? So, is it a disassociation altogether, or is
From
it
what I've
that they
found,
just, yeah.
it's a reframing.
I
And what
see.
they do with their mind is they reframe things and they dull things down. So, and it's not that you can't feel it, it's that you can't show it.
Got
And
it.
it's like a muscle that you have to flex to be able to be vulnerable. It's taken me a lot of work, a lot of years to get vulnerable. But here's the thing, most people don't even know that this fear and this anxiety and this trauma from their childhood is completely ruling their life. Now, we had this conversation, and basically what happens is, as we all know, it's kind of based in Freudian thinking, is repressed memories from your childhood. And what I've come to discover is that your body and your mind don't know the difference between negative emotions. What we have is we have this thing called a big negative emotion bag, I call it. We stuff all our negative emotions in, we carry it around on our shoulder, and it literally packs in our body, in our muscles. And sometimes you can actually release these in a massage. I have an episode on my YouTube about it. I talk about where a masseuse hit a spot and I just started crying because
Wow.
it was
Okay.
something that was packed inside of me. But I had to be willing to feel it.
Yeah.
And here's what happens. After stuffing it down, it usually goes nuclear and it
Okay.
usually explodes out.
Yeah.
And many times they reframe it as anger, sadness into anger, excitement into anxiety, and they have a real hard time processing these emotions.
And it's because their
Also,
body is feeling the same physiochemical changes as they would with like excitement and anxiety, because what happens in the physical body is the same thing, right?
correct. But from trauma, a lot of times, if there's physical abuse involved, if there is some type of traumatic experience that happened physically,
Yeah.
a lot of times what they end up having these physiological reactions to stress, anxiety, love, even depending on how your mom and dad loved you or how they didn't love you, that affects your relationships. If someone was molested, that affects, they might get, crammed up. They might not be able to have open conversations, and all of a sudden their partner doesn't understand what's going on with them. And so they translate that as something other than what's actually going on. And so relationships break up. The particular story that I think we should talk about is one client that I recently had that, we had identified that he had anxiety, fear, and he was avoiding a lot of personal interactions. And he was experiencing suffocation. He was experiencing chest pain. He was experiencing helplessness, fear, and something I like to talk about is freeze. So we got fight or flight and we got freeze. And a lot of people freeze and they retreat. And that's what he was doing. And after a conversation, he says, I want to overcome this anxiety and this fear. I can't understand what's happening. And I explained what was going on. And it turns out his brother would punch him in the chest until he peed his pants. He would hold a blanket over his face and suffocate him. He would drown him in the pool until he would literally pass out. And he was experiencing these same type of physiological reactions
Yeah.
to anxiety, stress, fear, excitement, and all of the above. They would all create this physical reaction, which was
Right.
him reliving this feeling. You see, he didn't understand that it came from there. As soon as we were able to kind of help him understand that, he was so blown away, he just dropped into tears and just
Yeah.
started crying. It was released from him. And as a matter of fact, after the second week, he had already written the letters I told him to do. And then only a month later, he's posting on social media. He's in a relationship. He's opening up about his feelings. He's talking to people. And it was this weight that was lifted from his life
Yeah.
because this fear is like a chain. It's like a chain around your heart, around your mind, around your brain. It holds you down.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's not that you don't feel it. It's that you don't understand what it is. And so you frame it in a way that doesn't make you feel weak. So for
Right.
example, if you feel fear, anxiety, you might turn into anger, rage, defensiveness,
Because
snapping at people.
that's not traditionally weak.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
Or if you went through trauma, which you and you're all needy with your partner, needing to be loved, needing to be appreciated, lying about stuff that exaggerating about things so that they think that you're cooler than you are. When what I say is the best game is always the truth. That's the best
Yeah.
game you can play.
Yeah.
Unbridled, straight in your face truth, because there it is. And so people, particularly men, have a hard time with this. But let me tell you, it's not just men. Okay.
Yeah.
Women
No,
also have a hard time with this too.
of
It could
course.
be as small as a teacher telling you that you were dumb. It could be as small as I'll tell you another. This was not a physical trauma, but the same client earlier on, before this torturing started, witnessed his dad drowned a mouse right in front of him. Right in front of him, he was like 4 or 5 years old. He drowns this mouse and kind of enjoyed it until the mouse was dead. And so, whenever his brother was later suffocating him in the pool,
He's
his
thinking about the
mind
mouse.
thought about the mouse. He was the mouse. He became the victim. Mice are quite helpless.
Yeah.
Mice
I
have
just
to
want
run
to,
away. Mice have to
yeah.
hide.
Yeah. And I just want to add on to this. I mean, the reason we also remember negative events, like I think a lot of times people think there has to happen so many times or has to be multiple instances, which also, yes, of course, they leave an impact. But a lot of times, if it's just one big significant event, you remember it if it's jarred you or left an impact somewhere, because just the way our brain is wired, we tend to remember a negative event a lot easier than a positive one because, well, going back to the origins of man, that's how you remembered how to survive or what was dangerous. But
Correct. And
gosh,
what happens?
yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
yeah.
Go ahead.
I
My
was just gonna
apologies.
say there is so much here. No, I mean there's
Here's what
the
happens.
mind.
Here's what
Yes, summarize
people
that for me
create a
because there's
belief
a
system.
lot. Yeah,
A belief system that completely determines their reality and their perception, which determines their reality.
yeah,
And so when you believe a false truth, like everybody hates me, I have proof to show everybody hates me, or you're going to leave just like my mom did. All
mm,
women leave.
mm,
Or I have to be rich because my parents said that I have to. So money's evil. And now you got this relationship with money that's completely based on false beliefs.
right.
And it's really interesting because there's a little story. I forgot who told it, but I told you about the meat. There was
Yes,
this girl who cut off both ends of the meat, and one day her husband says, "Why are you cutting off the tips of the roast? That's the best part." She goes, "Oh, my mom always did that. You're supposed to do it." So they called up their mom, and she said, "Oh, we only had a pan this big, so we had to cut off the tips to fit it in the pan."
yeah,
It's a learned thing that
yeah,
creates a belief that then determines your behavior, and so it's not always negative,
right. Yes,
right? So
absolutely.
that trauma creates something you learned.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's what it is, right? It creates your reality. And the thing is, you don't even realize that it's a perceived reality until you dig into it and until you begin to draw a line to see that it's just a narrative, it's a story. It is not what is within you. You have rather stepped into it. And I think until they learn to talk about it and take a step away from it, can they see it for itself and then begin to empty out and rebuild and put some good stuff or better, better beliefs or more wholesome ideas in there. But that takes a lot of work, especially when it's been so long. I want to jump into, you spoke about, of course, conditioning, and then, it starts very young. But I'm glad to see that there's hope. I mean, that's the biggest thing. And so vulnerability, there's so many ways people can be vulnerable. And I can understand, because even the word sounds, well, I don't want to say, but it gives a perception of weakness. But there is a lot of science that goes behind saying that people who are willing to be vulnerable, even men, who are willing to be more vulnerable and to share their emotions, you touched on it earlier, they tend to be perceived as more genuine, and they can create genuine connectivity and connections with those around them. They're also proven to be, more efficient leaders, better at the workplace, just healthier in general, and happier in their day-to-day professional and personal lives. Like, this is science. There's research behind this. And one place where people can start being vulnerable would be the advice that your mom gave you, which I would love if you elaborate this on a little more, which was, she said, talk about it. So can you tell me a little more about how this piece of advice changed, the course of your life?
Well, first of all, I do a lot of talking about it.
I can tell.
And as you guys know, but I'm really happy to do what I'm doing. It's a calling that came from my mom and my dad, and from God. And I feel like, I'm on a path I'm supposed to be on. But here's the thing. People like to talk, but they don't always like to talk about their feelings. People like to talk about what they want, but they don't want to talk about what they got to do to get there.
Yes.
People want to talk about how cool they are, but they don't want to talk about all the crap that they're doing wrong. And so vulnerability, what it does is it allows you to be empathetic and listen to other people. It allows you to let your guard down, to question your own belief system. Because if we're living in a false belief, that's why I'm telling everybody, guys, you got to focus on the true truth. That's not the truth that you think is true. It's the real truth that's happening. And, we have a real ego kind of centric society. And
Very
guess
much.
what? We don't want to talk about it because
Yeah.
it's vulnerable. We don't want to talk about it because, particularly, I grew up in a bad neighborhood. Although we had a very dysfunctional family, and my mom was a drug addict, we still had love in our house, and that was something I never questioned, that I was loved. And we always had open conversations about things. Now, for the parents out there, guys, let's talk to our kids with some real information here. Let's share some of that wisdom. Let's not be afraid to talk about some of these heavy subjects with our kids, because they're going into the world blind if we're not talking about it. In relationships, guys, we got to talk about our feelings and what's going on and get genuine. We got to be willing to make the changes we got to make, because there's nothing worse than getting broken up with and be like, why? And until you got to say, it's probably you, because we don't want to find out that it's us that has to change. And so that's why we don't want to talk about it. And I say this about TV all the time. I mean, there wouldn't even be a TV show if people just talked about it. The first episode, you guys could just communicate, and this whole TV show could be over by now.
Yeah.
But we need a TV show. We need it. Two people, one needs to tell the other person they're not talking about it. And that goes with all kinds of stuff. And it's learned in childhood.
I just want to touch on the communication part, because someone very close to me in my family spoke to me about communication the other day. We were talking about communication. And, for me, it's something that's super important. I mean, I tend to be communicative with friends, family, at work. And, she told me, and she said, communication is also not just about saying, oh, this is what it is. This is what it is. She's like, the biggest thing in communication is to be understood. It's about comprehending each other and your friends and everybody else. And I come from a communications background professionally, and it was the basics that you're taught, that communication is not about sounding fancy or using bombastic words, but it's just about being understood. And
absolutely.
if
So
you're able to be
maybe the real word
understood,
is communicate about it.
yeah,
Because you're right. You got to listen too.
Yeah.
I could tell you, me and my wife just went through a little tough time.
Yeah.
And it was because I didn't understand what was going on. And I couldn't hear her.
Yeah.
It's because I couldn't see that I was being selfish, that I was too obsessed with my projects. I had too many books I'm writing. And I need to take time to focus on
Her.
listening to her and just being aware. And so maybe not talk about it. Maybe we should start saying communicate about it, because you don't want to just talk somebody into the dirt.
Yeah. Yeah.
Conversation involves two people. It's not a monologue, it's a dialogue.
Yeah. Yeah.
And big problem in our country right now. Just a lot of people talking at each other. Nobody's listening. Nobody's getting anything done. We got all this drama going on. We got a lot of
Yeah.
problems to solve.
It's true. It's true. I think it's a
And
lot of times we tend to talk with the intent just to be heard, but not so much to listen to somebody else. It's like, I want to get my point across. I don't care what you have to say. I can put up a facade to act that, yes, okay, I'm listening, but am I genuinely really putting my ego and my pride and, myself off out of all of this, and to genuinely respect and listen to you, even if you're coming at me and saying, I don't like this and this and this. So, but yeah, it takes courage. Once again, vulnerability.
takes a lot of courage. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not going to sit
Yeah.
here and tell you it's easy to talk about it. I'm not, or communicate about it. But I can tell you, whenever you do face it, man, it's a big weight lifted off your shoulders. And that's what we're doing
Right.
with the VAR method that I told you about.
Yeah. So I wanted
Um,
to actually talk about that. That was my next question, because I mean, of course, there's a lot of work that we have to do on ourselves as adults, and you've spoken about the VR method before. So can you briefly walk us through this, and maybe some
yes.
examples of how it's helped?
Well, first of all, I wrote a book called "You Have Everything You Need to Get What You Want," and that's kind of where my journey started. And as I'm uncovering things about myself, I'm just learning more and more every day, and I'm so passionate about this subject. So I was doing a sound healing session in Koh Samui in Thailand, and we laid down, started doing meditating. I'll kind of speed up the story real quick, but we were meditating. I started visualizing this dot that my dad used to have me stare at, this red dot on this poster that had all these other circles on it. The circles represented distractions in life, and the red dot represented your center in your mind's eye. And so I would sit there and focus on that. Well, I'm sitting here doing that. I've been doing that for years and years and years. Well, for whatever reason, I don't know if it was the energy of this woman or what, but I began to kind of feel my dad's presence behind me, and then I was kind of trans like taken to this house that I grew up in, and I'm walking around in this space, and it's like a night day, like time lapse flashing, and some experiences happen there. And then I went up and through the house. There's a bunch of experiences happen there, and I go up into this room, which was the last room that I lived in the house. And my stepmom had locked me in that room for 2 weeks because she was attempting to rehabilitate me to the best of her ability. I'm very grateful for her today. But inside that room, I would make everything a mess and then clean it up, and then make everything a mess and clean it up. And sitting on my bed was this book, Pinocchio. And I suddenly had this memory of me sitting next to my bed and reading the last bit of this book, slamming it closed, throwing it against the wall, and screaming out, "I'm a real boy." And you would think, well, that's a traumatic experience.
Yeah.
You wouldn't think that's a traumatic experience, but for this kid who has this huge imagination, who feels out of place, who's the only white kid in his neighborhood, who when he goes to his white friend's house, he feels like completely like an alien. And so I wanted to be a real kid too. And I realized in that moment that something happened there, and I became desperate to be loved. And my inner child was desperate to be loved and approved. And that would play out in a major way for years and years in my life.
Yeah.
And so that experience, so then afterwards, we analyzed what I had been through. I talked about it. And that's when I realized that I had this child trauma. And let me tell you, there's a lot of different ones. And each one creates a different type of reaction. So we have to continuously kind of dig on a regular basis, meditating, being mindful. and really try to connect with these different traumatic experiences that we may have gone through or learned experiences that we've created belief systems around. So for everyone out there who's I'm going to be putting together a course about this, but the quick breakdown is, number one, we explain to the client, we've identified that there's an anxiety or a fear and they want to overcome it. Something's going on. A lot of times there's inner child stuff related to that. Then we tell them that you can't compare traumas. It could be something little, it could be something big. And so
Right.
we want
Yeah.
to really, really kind of be open to different levels of traumatic experience or learned behaviors that could make you do your different behaviors that you're doing right now. And so we begin by visualizing where this all could have started. It doesn't always happen the first time, but when there's a physical reaction to anxiety, or there is a really clear set of behaviors that are happening in a reaction to some type of situation in somebody's life. It could be love, it could be relationships, it could be at your job. You can't have a woman boss. You know, I had a problem with having women bosses for a while because of my
Oh, wow.
stepmom. You
Yeah.
know, because she was always on me, and so that was like, it was some kind of
Authority
weird thing.
figures, basically. It's an
Yeah,
authority
so
figure thing. Yeah.
I had to work through that and learn how to really be a great. Now I'm a great coworker with my wife and with any women that I work with. I coach a lot of women, but so we visualize where this could have started. Then after we've nailed down at least one traumatic experience, we want to analyze it by writing about it or talking about it. And really, how I do that is I instruct them to give me 5 words that they have feelings of, like fear, helplessness, anger, rage, sadness, whatever it might be. Those are the words that we need to use for each paragraph when we explain how we feel about this feeling that we're going through. And then, like many therapy practices, I suggest you burn it. Watch it burn, because it's over, man. We've let the air out of the bag, and it's gonna, the healing process has begun.
As
And
long as they
if
do it in a contained and safe way and don't set anything ablaze and put the house on fire.
don't burn down the
Yeah.
house, do it
Don't
outside in
burn
a
down
safe
the
place.
house.
Tear it up, do whatever you want. Put water on it, destroy it, watch it go away. You could put it in a drawer. Let's not get technical with that kind of stuff. A lot of guys want to get technical with this kind of stuff, but that's not what it's about. It could be 5 words that you write. He did this to me. It makes me feel angry. This happened when I was mad. And then, it doesn't have to be a novel. It doesn't have to be. Some people have sent me novels, like literally
Yeah.
10,000 word documents, some
Yeah.
of which are quite incredible. Others write it out. Others talk about it. And we'll just keep going over it. And then hopefully they have a realization in this moment, like my client had when he began to cry, or another client who said, wow, I never thought about it like that. That's crazy. Or another client who said, this stuff doesn't work for me. And then by the end of our conversation, he had a major breakthrough. A lot of guys say this stuff can't work for me also.
Yeah, I was going to
It
ask
can't
you
work for
about
me.
that. Like, oh, this is
Happens.
just nah,
Oh
no,
yeah, psychologist stuff
not
doesn't
for
work for
me.
me. Yeah, no, it's not
Yeah.
going to work.
Yeah.
I didn't have any trauma.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even though my dad was never around, I didn't have any trauma.
Yeah.
Even though I was involved in the gangs, I didn't have any trauma. I mean, come
Yeah.
on. Okay, there's things that are affecting your success today. Success isn't just money. Success
Right.
is mind, body, and soul, baby. You got to feel
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
You got to feel good. You got to have good people around you. And so when you visualize, analyze, and realize, what you're going to realize is you're in control of your life. That person is not here attacking you. That situation is over. So whenever me and my wife are going through problems, right away, I notice my inner child doing 3 different things. And as it turns out, this is quite common. Blame game,
Yeah.
false narratives, making
Hmm.
up stories. Well, it must have been this or it must have been that. Blaming. It's not me. It's not me. It definitely can't be me. And then the other one was denial.
That's a big
And
one.
so when I recognize those were happening, I go, I'm not blaming. I'm not creating false narratives. I'm not going to create some horrible future that's going to happen when she leaves me and everything's going to fall apart and she must be seeing somebody else and who knows what's going on and what did I do? What's me? What's my me, right? Like this little kid.
Yeah.
That's what
All
we
the
do.
rumination just gets into a zone. Yeah.
Yeah, and that
Yeah.
goes for when you have this trauma. That happens when job situations, money situations, relationship situations, and your relationship with life can get pretty screwed up.
Yeah.
And so once you're able to realize you've begun the process of being able to control that inner child and not let it attack your life anymore. Because listen, the inner child doesn't want to hurt you, wants to protect you. The inner child wants to keep you safe. And fear is really great whenever it's protecting you from terrible dangers or burning your hand. But if it's keeping you from loving, if it's keeping you from success, if it's keeping you from having real, solid, beautiful relationships, if it's keeping you from being a person people can rely on and count on, if it's making you this flaky person, if it's making you this angry and resentful person, because this process has a lot to do with resentments too, and letting go of
Of
these
course.
resentments.
Yeah. Yeah. Disappointment, resentment, anger. Yeah.
Exactly. And who suffers in resentments? You.
Just
You
yourself.
do,
Yeah.
not the
Yeah.
person that did the thing to you. They don't think about you anymore.
Yeah. I think a lot of times, I mean, it sounds to me, I mean, first of all, thank you for sharing the VAR method. So it's visualize, analyze, and then realization. Well, realize. And I think it sounds like a good, first step for people to figure that out, like what is going on. Because I think it's only until, people take a step back or they've just been kind of in this whirlwind of what's happening in their lives that I think everybody at some point, if they've experienced trauma or gone through anything difficult, everybody reaches a point where they're just like, that's just Murphy's Law and I don't know what to do anymore. I think everybody, at some point in their life will reach that point. And also, I want to thank you for talking about a little bit the comparing our trauma, because, not too long ago, I was talking to a friend and we had a conversation about trauma and things like that. And we were just discussing ideas, things we've read. And, one of the common things that comes up is, well, there's other people in the world who've had it much worse. And then when you do that, you're kind of dismissing that maybe what you experienced was unpleasant. Just because somebody else has it worse doesn't mean that what you went through was not bad either, or that you don't need to work through it.
I think we can look to Buddha for that.
Yeah,
Buddha says don't compare suffering. Suffering is suffering. And
suffering is
the point of
suffering.
life is to not suffer. And so
Yes.
stop suffering. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of the whole point there is why do we have to keep suffering
Yeah.
if there is a way? That doesn't
Exactly.
mean it goes away. So I don't want to provide any
Yeah.
false hope to people.
Of
Oh, I
course.
can just forget about it and move on with my life. Well, you can forgive about it and move on with your life, but you can't forget about it,
Of
because
course.
this is part of what makes you the great person you are. And I
Yeah.
want people out there to hear me clearly, please. People listen to this. If you're going through stuff and you face it, you walk through it, and you overcome that trauma, you become an asset for good. If you don't walk through your trauma, there could be somebody you run into the grocery store that you couldn't say the thing that they needed to hear that day, or your daughter, or your husband, or your friend at work, or
Yeah.
on and on. You become a force for good to help other people, and the ripple effects are huge,
Absolutely.
because many times what we do is we repeat. That trauma becomes part of our DNA, and we pass it
Yeah.
on.
Oh,
That
yeah.
learned behavior,
Yeah.
cutting off the ends of that meat. Racism, sexual inequality. People who are raised in a household where the dad beat mom. People who were raised in a household where mom was evil to dad all the time. People who were raised in a household where they were completely loved. Different situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
People saying they love you and then feeling that love is a little bit different,
Right. Yes. Of course.
because
It's
you can
easy to
feel
say things.
completely alone in a
Yeah.
room full of people,
Yes.
You can feel totally alone next to somebody if
Yeah.
that connection isn't there.
Of course. So, Zach, I want to talk about, like, a lot of people, I mean, in today's world, it's no surprise everybody's going through something, or a lot of people are going through something, and some worse than others. They find it difficult to be vulnerable because they find it difficult to talk about it. Maybe they don't have anybody. What would you say is the first step for them to get started? Should they maybe start journaling? Should they reach out to somebody for help? Where can they begin to start to heal?
Okay, so first of all, we have to understand that it is a journey. And I know that's cliche. I know that people are like, oh, great. But that's life. It's going to have lots of layers. And so you have to start the process to eventually get there. I'm still uncovering fear that I'm dealing with. I'm still uncovering things that I'm doing in relationship. I'm still discovering that I have to manage my ADHD on a daily basis. And so, we all have to start where we're at.
Yeah. Yeah.
And absolutely, I would say look for a coach, therapist. Therapists are great, but that can be tricky too because just like everybody, therapists are individuals, and some are good, some are not. I'm available. I can only do so much and handle so many people, but I've got a lot of information on my website. Um, but the very first step is the willingness to do it, to face it, the willingness to at least start. That's where it starts. And then the next step is, of course, journaling. And I 100% am down with groups. Group sessions are great. Men's groups are great. And embrace the idea that there is hope. Because for some of you out there that feel like, oh man, there's no way I'm going to get rid of this thing. Some of my clients have been molested by their uncle for years. Witnessed horrendous things in Afghanistan. Had absent fathers, went through gangs, spent time in prison. And guess what? These people are having breakthroughs and they're having better lives every single day. Because the human experience is not a unique experience. We're all going
Right.
through the
Yeah.
same stuff. Don't bottle it up. Don't hold it down. If you're going through
Absolutely.
fear, talk about, why am I doing this? And it took me a long time. One perfect example is in my last business, I was trying to make my clients love me. That's not a way to do business. You can't make clients love you because your inner child is desperate to be loved. You need
Right.
to face this stuff.
Yeah.
You can't be all up on your wife and just inner grill. Why don't you love me? Why don't you love me? Why? Because you have some inner child trauma that you need to work through. You can't lie about things to people to make yourself feel better, because it's not going to happen when you're busted. Now you feel 10 times worse than you did. Why? Well, as it turns out, your dad was a big liar too. Now you're just doing the same thing. If he was racist, guess what? You might have some racist stuff going on with you. If he had money problems, you might have money problems going on too. We all know rich dad, poor dad, right? Luckily, he had a rich dad to teach him, because if he learned everything from poor dad, we wouldn't know who he is today. Everybody wants to learn how to make money. How about learning how to feel good? How about learning how to live a great life? How about learning how to feel healthy? How about having great
Absolutely.
relationships?
Yeah.
And then, of course, focusing on the process, and hopefully the money will follow too.
Yeah.
But we have to really focus on great content. We have to focus on reading some books on it. And what
Yeah.
I say, getting interested. You got to get interested.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I
And,
think
and,
if I
and
was to summarize, I mean, there's a lot of wisdom here that you've already shared. I mean, one, of course, conditioning, that's where it all starts. We shouldn't be comparing our trauma, learning to be vulnerable, because it's shown that people who are vulnerable have healthier lives, healthier minds, healthier relationships. And even the room is telling me to get out of the room, but healthier minds, healthier relationships, and just happier people in general. And of course, the VAR method: visualize, analyze, and realize, and that not everybody, actually, nobody should have to suffer. While suffering is a part of life, like what your book says, you have it all in you to come out of it. At the end of the day, you have to take back control of your life, even if it's one small step at a time. So, Zach, on that note, I wanted to say, if people want to reach out to you, where can they reach out to you and where can they find you?
You can find me at zachtouchon.com, ZACHTOUCHON. And if you just look up Zach Touchon, you'll find me all over the place. For your listeners, right now, I'm giving away free access to changeyouchallenge.com. I've got some great
Super.
guided meditations, got my audio book for free there you can listen to, and a lot of great information.
Super.
And so
That's
I've got my book, You Have Everything You Need to Get What You Want, available on Amazon, still top 1% of books in self transformation, personal development, and Amazon books in general.
super.
And so we had a lot of success with that. One last little thing, guys, there's hope. There's hope. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. There's a better life right over a little bit of uncomfort. We got to stop being comfortable in our misery and push through this fear that's holding us back in our life. And that's the way to break through to that success that you want. And I just want you guys to know I've seen it happen. And so it's pretty amazing. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for having me here.
No problem. Thank you for sharing all of this, Zach. I mean, this is a lot, and I'm really glad that people know where to go to find you, to read more about this, to consume all of the research and the work that you've created, and also for thank you for being so vulnerable in sharing your story, because I think that is always where the difficulty is. But you've really been super vulnerable about sharing everything, and I hope after this conversation you have some quality time with your wife so that you can communicate and comprehend as well. Give her some
We're
time.
doing great.
Your clients are important, but wife is number one always.
Yep.
And yeah, I think this is going to be super beneficial to everybody. So thank you everybody for watching today and for listening, and if you're joining in. And thank you, Zach, for joining. And if you feel this is going to resonate with somebody, please do share it with someone, and remember to subscribe. Until next time, stay wise, everybody. All right. See you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.